Just for the benefit, we'll welcome everybody on the webcast as well. So this morning's session is being simultaneously webcast as well with a number of people online. So all speakers, be careful what you say because it'll be recorded for history. So we'll be on our best behaviour. My name's Chris Danks. I'm with the Knowledge Transfer Network. We're here to organise the event today. Got two colleagues from the KTN here today. We've got Kaylee at the front and Lucy at the back, who's moderating the webcast today. And we've got the number of speakers from Innovate UK. So obviously any questions, I mean, you've met Jess as you came in on the reception, so Jess can help you with any other issues that you may have today. Just a quick introduction and housekeeping. So there is no fire alarms planned today. If there is a fire alarm, it won't be an alarm, it will be a voice, a lady's voice, to tell you to sit still until told otherwise. So we listen to the instructions when that happens, and if that is the case, we exit to the left here, or if we're in the main room, there's exits in the catering area, and then we'll be escorted out to the rendezvous point outside the hotel. If you could turn your phones onto silent, that'd be great, but obviously keep them on so that you can do all your Twitter action. Toilets, if you can, the toilets are just outside this room to the right. Be careful, I've got lost once already, so if you follow the signs to the toilets, that's great, but be careful when you come out to make sure you turn right, not left, otherwise you end up in the bowels of the hotel. Just a quick warning there. All the catering, hopefully you grabbed a bit of breakfast, will also be served outside here where you came in. And the Wi-Fi is etc. venues is there, and the password is Wi-Fi 8119. There's little cards on your desk, so that should be to connect on. If you've been to an etc. venues before, as we have, you may have been to a few briefing events recently. Sometimes you have to take that network off and then try again. But if you have any problems, just grab us at the break. So knowledge transfer is all about building connections and driving innovation. That's what we're here to do today. We'll be focusing on the specific competition for UK-China as part of Transforming Food. And our job is to make sure you can find the connections that you're looking for to drive that innovation. And that's what we do. We do partnering, we help with funding to help you review your bids, and we do lots of events. And we do most of the briefing events on behalf of Innovate UK relating to about all the competitions. But the job today is all about connecting you and making sure you can source the right information in the right place. One thing that we've set up is a LinkedIn group. So many of you may be looking for partners. Hopefully you'll find them here today, and obviously those on the webcast. There's a LinkedIn group. All these slides will be circulated, but there's a LinkedIn group which is covering all of transforming food production. And on there you can put the sort of maybe the innovation area that you're looking for or the innovation area that you can offer. Obviously that's open for everyone to look at. It's probably good in that to put a mention that you are looking at China on there, because that LinkedIn group is covering all of transforming food production. As you'll hear from Nicole's presentation, there are a number of different elements to the transforming food, and that LinkedIn page is covering all of them. But a good place to post it on there. There's guides and instructions on how best to use that site. So a very brief overview of today. What we'll get from this is to understand this specific competition, the objectives, the scope, and the rules of applying for this. Then there'll be opportunities to network a lot of today with short delegate pitches this afternoon, lots of chances to network in the room. We'll probably do a little bit of speed dancing, and you'll also hear a little bit of case studies from people that have, groups that have worked in China before, to give you a little bit of advice on those. And to give you some helpful hints, there are a number of people from Innovate that are speaking, and there'll be other people in the audience if they can get down here, and having train issues at the moment. So there'll be plenty of people to speak to if you've got specific questions relating to this call. And obviously if we can't help you today, we can point you in the right direction following this meeting. So there will be chance for, we've received a number of opportunities for people to pitch, so that will come a bit later on today. You've seen, hopefully you've all picked up the delegate capabilities and what's available as you came in on the registration, so that you can find people. If there's anybody you're specifically looking for, please contact one of the KTN staff. We'll try and help you and find the person that we want. So the aim for you today is to speak to as many people as possible. It's all about trying to build up those specific collaborations that you need for this call. And the more people you speak to, the more opportunity of doing that. It'd be great if you can post on social media, hashtag Transforming Food Production, very creative one. It'd be great to know people are going on there. And it also indicates that you're clearly looking for partners and everyone in this for this particular call. Well, I'll mention this several times, but there are lots of other events, and we'll mention a couple of those during the day. But if you're keen to find out other things, other briefing events, other events that are coming around, I would encourage you to sign up to the KTN newsletter, which you'll get an email once a month, that will give you detailed information about briefings and other events that are going on, so you don't miss anything. And we will send additional emails out when events are coming close, so that you can make sure that you don't miss out on anything that might be useful for you. So if there's no questions on the logistics of today, obviously any problems, just shout us. We'll kick off with the main presentations with Nicole first. And we hope you have a great day, and we're here to help you all day. So hand over to Nicole.
Which one is it? Good morning. Lovely to see so many people here and showing the interest that we have in the Transforming Food Production Challenge, and particularly with our bilateral competitions that we have coming up. My name's Nicole Pethybridge. I'm the Senior Programme Manager for the programme. So I want to give you an overview of the programme today, and before we move into the specifics of China. It would help me if I could just maybe have a show of hands, those of you who attended our sort of relaunch type event at the beginning of October. How many in the room? So not too many. What I didn't want to do was maybe repeat information that you've had before that way. So this really is about the industrial strategy. It's about how we sit within the industrial strategy and what we want to do to transform food production. The industrial strategy is a government initiative founded a couple of years ago to really put 5 key pillars to the front of how we promote industry in the UK and make it a global leader. And this is based around ideas, people, infrastructure, business environment and places. And UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, really sits within this under 4 themes and what we call the grand challenges, which is AI and data, ageing society, clean growth, and the future of mobility. And whilst transforming food production does span several of these, we do fit quite firmly within the clean growth grand challenge area. There have been a couple of waves, what we call waves of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, and Transforming Food really sits in what we call Wave 2. And here there are 8 challenges out of a total now of 21. And there's quite a considerable amount of investment. I think the overall investment is about 2.6 billion. And Transforming Food Production has got up to a £90 million budget within that area. And I'm sure that's why you're here today, is to understand the share of what's available to yourselves. What I'd like to do is just sort of place UK research and innovation in context. So in 2018, the Research Council's Innovate UK and Research England joined together under the umbrella of UK Research and Innovation. And the grand challenges and the industrial strategy definitely span this. So whilst we will talk later about Innovate UK and using their processes, we mustn't forget that BBSRC is very much a partner in our grand challenge and in transforming food production. And that we work across all the research councils to get the best use out of our people and to support you. So the industrial strategy itself, the Challenge Fund has specific objectives, and these are really about growing the UK business investment in R&D and improving that capability and capacity. What we're looking for is multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research. And as I think all of us acknowledge, the traditional boundaries between research disciplines are beginning to break down, and we need to think wider and how we can utilise each other's expertise. It's about increasing business and academic engagement on these innovation activities and increasing collaboration, particularly between younger companies and the more established ones. We really want you to use the networking opportunities today to build those connections and those value chains. And very pertinent today is about increased overseas investment in R&D and how we exploit that both inward and outward. So what is our challenge specifically about? We've spent a lot of time making sure that we've got the right objectives and looking towards what we all know is a key element at the moment. So we're really focused towards that net zero emissions of productive food systems by 2040. And where do we sit in that and what's our contribution to that? So it's about accelerating the development and adoption of precision agriculture approaches to really improve productivity and enable food to be produced in ways that are more efficient, resilient and sustainable. And in doing so, drive that economic growth across the country and be a global leader. So we have 5 specific objectives, and I really would like to draw your attention to these. These are really important, and they are really important in terms of your application and the scope of what you're proposing to do. And I know my colleague Tom will reinforce this a little bit more. We've got 5 objectives, and it is around creating data-driven solutions for primary agriculture, but using that to help us towards this net zero. It's about embedding the adoption of those precision approaches to bridge the productivity gap and strengthen the connections between yourselves, researchers, businesses and practitioners. The challenge is about stimulating the establishment of new value systems, and we do have a specific competition around that, but anything that you want to do that also falls into that is more than welcomed, because we want the UK to be at the forefront of new industries. We want to drive UK growth in precision technology and create high-value jobs in the agricultural value chain. And, very pertinent to today, develop export opportunities and increase that investment in the UK research and innovation. So our challenge is broken down into main themes or streams, and we have funding allocated to this. So a large portion, the 50 million, is about future food production systems, and that's particularly focused to UK activities. There's about 30 million allocated to science and technology and to practice, which is really about building communities, networks, and making sure that the technology that has been developed already is demonstrated and adopted throughout the country. And then relevant today, we have £10 million worth of funding to focus on international relations and building the opportunities of partnerships and working particularly with China and Canada. And then next year, across this, we'll also be looking at how do we utilise investment accelerators in different ways to bring the investment community to yourselves. And that spans across the whole challenge. But this really is a very clear diagram of where our funding sits at present. So this is the funding allocated to the bilateral agreements, of which China is one, and it is about that international activity, and Tom will talk you through that in more detail. But how do we make sure that that brings new technologies to take advantage of overseas markets? And it's a co-funded approach with matched funding from our international partners. So we have £10 million across all our international activities, and that's matched by the same funding from China and Canada. Just a little bit more as an overview of the whole programme. The Future Food Production Systems is about disrupting traditional land-based models and producing new, efficient, low-emission production. And that's had 20 million allocated to it for a competition that opened last September, and which you might have heard about if you did attend the event at the beginning of October. And we've already committed 25 million of our budget from last year. So this is definitely a portfolio approach of projects and activity. And then the science and technology is about increased engagement and collaboration, demonstrating market solutions at scale, and providing yourself and others with the evidence of feasibility, both technical and economic, and about embedding that co-innovation approach across business, academia, and practitioners. And as I mentioned, the investment accelerator will make sure that we've got grant funding alongside private investors to make sure that what we do is tangible to the marketplace and is early investment into early stage precision-based companies to help them get access to that commercial needs and market opportunities. And we will be announcing more about this in the following year. So really, I'd like to almost take you back to the beginning. It's about our objectives. It's about productivity, sustainability, and net zero emissions. We spent a lot of time creating the opportunities so that they build synergies between themselves and but also amplify the outputs that we will get from that. If you weren't at the October briefing, we were very fortunate to have Paul Clark from Ocado, who actually talked about his vision of supply chains, the food system, agriculture, and not just from a warehousing and supermarket perspective. And actually the link is there, and it's a very insightful way to make you think slightly differently. So I would suggest that you follow that and have a watch if you haven't seen it. So we're going to take you now into the more detail of the competition itself, both from a scope perspective and a application. And today most probably will be the easy part, but we do wish you success in engaging with our programme going forward. And there's help available to you today and in the future through our normal channels. So if anybody's got any questions about the overall programme, I'm more than happy to take those. Straightforward. Okay. If there are no questions, are there any questions online on the programme? No? Then I'll hand over to Tom.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I thought it was going to be in a basement, but there is a window. So that's normally what happens when I have to do briefings. Doesn't matter what country, make sure there's a basement, no windows. Tom doesn't like those. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through, because there's a lot of networking opportunities here, quickly go through the scope. In my view, as an experienced innovation leader, Innovate UK, it's quite a simple scope, but obviously I'll give you lots of time to ask any questions if you're unsure about anything. But as Nicole actually pointed out, that we have some fantastic, going to the mic now, some fantastic channels, customer support group that really most questions should be directed to because they get back to you in such a quick and timely manner. So here we are. So this is the scope briefing for this specific bilateral funding competition with China. My name is Tom Fiddian. I don't work in the agritech team, but I will shepherd you through the scope proceedings today. That was a joke, guys. Okay, China. So first of all, I want to give you context. Nicole explained the whole program, I think, very efficiently, and actually showed you where the pots of money sit in the whole of the program and how they fit together to ensure that the UK hits its objectives. And as you also highlighted, that the total pot is 10 million, and 5 million is going to China, and we've got Canada coming down the road. So why are we focusing on China at the moment? Well, to put it simply, there's three elements. One is, in fact, they are very much aligned to the similar challenge that we have when it comes to precision farming. And the example here is that China has to feed 20% of the world's population with only 4% of the world's arable land. So it's very much aligned to their own, I wouldn't say industrial strategy, but their own direction of travel that they're working with. So in fact, when we have discussions with them around this challenge, we are very much, aligned on this issue. Secondly, economic. China spends nearly £300 billion annually in R&D, and 78% of this is spent by industry. So it's a perfect country even to partner with because of their business-led R&D and innovation, something that the UK I wouldn't say could learn from, but actually could shift its position, because in fact in the UK we need to spend more per capita on R&D spending in industry. And secondly, and this is a very tangible one, we actually already have an MOU with China and have a successful record of bilateral funding with the Ministry of Science and Technology over there. So in fact, we already have those relationships, and it makes it a lot easier when we go down the road and we actually choose the winning projects. So objectives. Nicole pointed out how significant they are, and they are significant because this is the second time you've seen the slide. So to highlight, one thing I want to highlight about these objectives are the reason why there is £90 million available for this challenge is because of these objectives, and these are things that we always have to hit. So even though I'm talking about the China brief here, every single competition and piece of funding that comes out of this program will directly relate to these objectives. So really, it's really important that you understand these, you understand where this is coming from, the context of the whole program. Now, for this competition, we are aligned to objective 1, 4, and 5. So when it comes to understanding your project and understanding the scope, you must be aligned to these 3 objectives. I think they're quite self-explanatory, and I think when we go down into the scope, you'll see that actually it's quite easy to be aligned to these if you are aligned to the other scope documents. But that's really important. And my recommendation for anybody applying is when you're filling in the application form, at the first box that says, "Are you in scope?" and that isn't scored, that's, it's either you are in scope or you aren't. I think it would be really useful and helpful for the assessors if you just reference these and actually explain why you are aligned to these. So it's not just some of the bullet points that are on the later slides. It is a key element is the fact that you are aligned to these 3 points. So I think I've laboured that point enough, but please do. And honestly, when my other colleagues present the other competitions, so when they come out, they will do a similar slide where they'll put the 5 out there and they go, and it will be a different combination, and sometimes they overlap, but it's key. It's key for everybody that's working in this sector that's trying to address this challenge. So we have up to £5 million, that's the total pot, and the aim of this competition is to encourage the use of data-intensive methods for commercial farming. Sometimes this is defined as precision farming or smart farming. So I've been very jazzy with the font and the colour, just to highlight the points that I want to get across that sometimes get lost in the scope document when it's on the gov.uk website, where everything's just black and white and we can't really play around with font sizes. So sometimes there's a must and sometimes there's a could. So when you're looking for a scope, there are some things you have to do, and sometimes there are things that you could, or either or. And it's really important to understand that, because I don't want people tripping up because they haven't understood or they haven't actually hit one of the must-haves in the competition. So your project must be business-orientated and aim to develop one or both of the following. So when we say business-orientated, we mean after the project finishes, it must be you must be in a position to commercialise quickly. And you will see by the way, the phrasing of the language and also the way the funding is laid out, that it is designed to be very close to commercialisation. In fact, the funding mechanism that we're using is the closest one that UK URI has to commercialisation. So it must aim to develop one or both of the following. That is autonomous technologies, for example, and in the brackets, these are just examples, sensors, systems, vehicles and robotics, or data-driven solutions to enhance productivity while reducing emissions. So you can do, it must have one of these, it could have both. Don't force yourself into a situation where you're trying to align to both of these, because if the project, if you hit one of them, that's fine enough. Don't try and force your project down a direction, that shoehorn it into another category just because you want to hit both of these. It's a scope question. If you hit both of these, it doesn't mean you're going to get high scores in the rest of the questions. So here's another must. So the project must engage with commercial end users. Again, we said business orientated. The funding is aligned to be commercialised really quickly, so it must engage with commercial end users. And these could, so this is just a list of things that we would define as engaging with commercial end users. So this could include using demonstration sites, farms, labs, or other R&D facilities in either UK, China, or both. Okay, so we're not saying which ones you have to use. It should be self-explanatory depending on the project that you are running. And we envision projects falling into the following broad categories. So this is not a must. These are just lists of categories from the discussions that we've had with China. So if you find yourself in a situation where your project doesn't fall in one of these categories, but it is aligned to the other elements of the scope, you are in scope. It just means that you're not in an area that we have had discussions about. And it doesn't mean that you still will be taken forward and you will still be discussed, will be assessed and be discussed with China if you get the high enough score. The first one is remote sensing for decision making. These can sense crop growth and nutrients, soil health, weather, crop yield predictions, water stress management or pest control, remote sensing technologies including satellites and drones, as well as in-situ sensors linked by appropriate data connections. Smart pasture production. This can include animal feeding systems, analysis of herds and individual animals, farm-wide environmental control systems, methane emissions reductions and improving animal welfare, and precision technologies for indoor or controlled environment agriculture. These can be vertical farming, planting, transplanting, harvesting, precision watering or fertilizer applications. Systems exploiting big data. These are create systems that collect, aggregate, and analyze farm data to improve productivity. They must develop protocols that enable data sharing, interfaces, and data exchange. And lastly, robotic systems for agriculture. Develop robotic systems to analyze soil conditions. These can include detection and prediction of pests and diseases, making precision applications for agrochemicals, planting and transplanting, or cloud-based robot control systems. So, as you can tell, I had to read off some slides here to put the details down there. So these are things that we've been discussing with China. So if you are involved in one of these areas, I would say that you are definitely in scope. So you will probably find that you all align to the other elements, so you'll be in scope. But just to make the point, if you feel that you're not in one of these themes, please speak to us and we can have a discussion to see if you are in scope. But you should be if you align to those earlier points that I mentioned. We are not funding. I like this bit. It's very simple. So basically, we will not fund earlier stage research that's not ready to be commercialized. We've already made it very clear that we want this to be very close to commercialization. And also, shockingly, we will not fund projects that don't meet the scope or the objectives of the challenge. So, I just thought, I like mentioning it. It's like really a belts and braces approach. So it's simple. We have a scope. It only has a few bullet points to it, and it has to be aligned to the objectives. So please ensure that you do that and ensure that the projects are close to commercialization. So, eligibility. Your consortium must include the following elements. Now, I think this is not harder. This is technically a little bit more difficult than actually aligning to the scope because it is a specific type of consortium that we're looking for to fulfill the requirements of bilateral funding with China. And they are, so on the UK side, one UK business of any size and one UK-based academic organisation or RTO. So that's the minimum. Depending on the project, that consortium can be far more complex, but it must have a business and it must have a research organisation, to put it bluntly. But it could be of any, it could be in any sort of orientation that you want. That's from the UK side. Now from the China side, again, you must have one business of any size or any Chinese academic organisation or research organisation. So we call this the 2x2, and I believe this is quite standard for all our bilateral funding that UKRI does. Now in the UK component, which is the component with the flag, which is the component that we will be funding, the consortium must carry out its project work in the UK. but it can do some work in China if it's reasonable, and it's something that couldn't be carried out in the UK, and it must intend to exploit its results from or in the UK. So put it bluntly, if we are investing money into a UK consortium to do some research and innovation, we want to ensure that the value, so it could be the economic value or even the societal value, is actually felt in the UK. So as we said, so the funding, so Innovate UK, which is delivering this for UKRI, has allocated 5 million to fund these projects. The maximum grant available for UK partners, which is the UK consortium, is £500,000 per project. Please understand that this isn't the total project size, this is the total grant size. Sometimes, if you're familiar with the competitions that come out of, that are delivered by Innovate UK, sometimes we put total project size, sometimes it's grant. So this is key when you're filling those forms in. And we've classified this as experimental development. And because of that, the maximum projects that you're eligible to be funded for are 45% if you're a micro or small business, 35% if you're a medium-sized business, or 25% if you're a large business. So this is different from the funding levels for feasibility studies or industrial research, and they are the levels, they are the maximum levels that we can actually provide for funding for projects that are that close to commercialisation. And again, and this is pretty much standard for funding that comes, that's delivered by Innovate UK, the research organisations in your consortium can share of 30% of the total eligible project costs, not the total grant. So that means that 70% of the total project costs must come from industry. And I think in this competition, that shouldn't be too hard. It shouldn't be too much of a shift because it's so close to commercialisation. We would imagine that the most activity will come from industry. So we've got a timeline. This timeline has changed from the last time we did this presentation. I had to change one of the dates. So if I click, is it going to work? Yeah, so we're looking at the past now. The competition has opened. It's been open for a while. Open on the 14th. Briefing event is today. It's very helpful that I put it up there. Just so you know what's going on. So there'll be fireworks. Competition closes on the 22nd of January. In fact, this is on FTP, so you do have to register at least a week before the competition closes, but I'm sure Nicole will cover that. But I'm sure you've all registered anyway. And you'll be notified in March about if you've been successful. I want you to bear in mind, and I know Nicole will cover this, that this is not, the funding isn't just coming from UKRI. So because it's a bilateral, there will be, it takes slightly more time to, in fact, completely notify people who are successful projects going forward because there are two bodies working together. So there are two processes that are happening in parallel and we must come to agreement at the end. So just to be clear, on the scope document, we are very strict about when a project can start and when it can finish. Now, if there is delay notifying projects, then the delay is on our side, and that we will not impede any projects, and we will allow them to go for, if they're 24 months, we will allow them to be 24 months. So that's on our side. So please bear that in mind, that the projects may start later than you envisioned, and also bear it in mind when you're putting your projects together, that does mean that there may be less opportunities for extensions. And I know I'm really going far into the future, say if you've been successful, there'll be less opportunities for extensions in your project. So please bear that in mind when you're putting your plan together. And then the projects start. And there we are, that's the end. Are we doing questions now, or are we doing them? Are we doing them afterwards? That's good. So just forget your questions and I'll just disappear. Okay. Thank you. And Nicole's coming back on the stage.
There we are. Thank you, Tom. So it is with a great joy, and I'm sure you're really looking forward to this portion, is where I actually take you through the process of application and how to apply. So it is important. if you've got a wonderful scope, a great project, and a great opportunity for commercialisation, we want you to be able to present that to us and us manage to assess it appropriately. And to do that, you need to fill in our forms, you need to apply in a certain manner, and I'll take you through the process. But it is very unfortunate, and we do see it, where people have a great project, but because they've missed out a crucial step or they haven't supplied the right information at the right time, they become ineligible. And we really don't want that to happen to yourselves. So for this portion of the challenge funding, we are using the Innovate UK application method. Many of you may be familiar with that, either in the past, where we used an FTP upload site, or whether it's the new online portal. And we are using, you will start, and I'll explain that in a minute, on the online system, but we are using an FTP site because of the way that the terms and conditions work in a bilateral competition of this nature. But I did just want to reinforce and put up the slide I showed you earlier, that the Transforming Food Production Challenge spans UK research and innovation. And it's just that Innovate UK will be acting as the host delivery agent for this portion of the funding. So what I'm going to take you through is the different elements of an application. Tom has done that, so where we overlap, I won't labour the point too much, but just tell you what you have already done. Can I, again, it helps me to help you, if you give me a show of hands, people who've applied for our grants through Innovate UK before. So about half, so there's quite a few people in the room who haven't. Okay, that's useful, thank you. So as Tom explained, we have eligibility criteria from a UK perspective and a Chinese perspective. So do make sure that your consortium that you put together has at least a minimum of this. You can have more partners, but you must have the minimum to be eligible, and we will check that. And again, just make sure that you've got elements carried out in the UK, and we exploit that. And as Tom said, the grant value for the UK partners is £500,000, sorry, and project lengths up to 24 months. So again, key elements, if you get those bits wrong, then right at the beginning, we won't even assess your application. And, just to put on the screen there, the sorts of businesses and research organisations that we fund. And for the research and technology organisations, that's things like the catapults. Some of the Agri centres fall under that umbrella as well. So, as we've said, for this level of funding, at least 70% of the eligible project costs must be incurred by a business. And an academic institution can only take 30% of that. And in this competition, the UK lead is the business. We often get asked the question, how many projects can I be part of? And a UK business can lead one application, but collaborate in 2 more. And if you don't lead, you can again have a total of up to 3 applications. And in this instance, a research or technology institute can also be party to 3 applications. But to be aware, and it might not apply in this case, but we do look at resubmissions. So if we've had your project proposal before and it's not been successful, then it needs to be significantly different and a new proposal to be submitted here. We don't allow resubmissions of same project proposals to this competition opportunity. The other thing that we're becoming more and more strict on is if you've had previous projects with us and you've not submitted your final paperwork or your independent accountant's report, then you won't be eligible for funding. And again, we're looking very much at exploitation. If you've been involved in previous projects, have you exploited the technology? Have you taken it forward? Really, have we, the UK government and UK taxpayers, have we had a return? Have we seen the benefit of your proposals and your work. And particularly for the industrial strategy, this is very, very important that we're looking at outcomes and impacts around those objectives that we talked about before. So really bear that in mind. We've given you the dates there. They have shifted very slightly, I think, into the being informed in March. But the timeline, the most important thing, and I'm going to tell you the most important thing, is application. Applications must be received by 12 noon on the day of close. I used to run the customer support area, and I have had people in tears at 5 minutes past 12 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I've had people lose their jobs. Well, not my team, but I've heard of people because they've missed the application deadline. If you've worked to put a bid together, make sure you submit before the timeline. This is actually off our IFS system, our digital system, but the pattern is the same. You can see that applications are submitted at the last minute. Particularly with the system that we're going to describe now, do not leave it to the last minute. You will have difficulties. So just a word of warning there. So just to take you through the process, the details are available. So all the scope documents, all the funding guidance is available on the Innovate UK funding website. And it's listed there. That's a screenshot of the China competition. What you need to do to start an application is actually to hit that green button, and then that will give you a link to apply with your email address for an application form. We are not using the online portal for the application for this system. We're using what's called an FTP site, so a file transfer site. So you need to register, and then the lead will be sent the details for the application forms and the finance forms. And this really is the process. So you register for the competition, then you download both the application form and the finance forms. The application form is really important because it has a unique number to you. And you need to use that particular form to fill in the details and not copy it into another Word document or another Word type software, because you lose the formatting and the site then when we come to sort of receive them, the site doesn't recognise the document and it doesn't get uploaded. So it's really important to make sure you use the forms that are provided. And then, as Tom said, it goes through a process where you complete it and submit it, and we check it against eligibility and the scope, and then it's sent to assessment. On the application form, we have 11 questions, and there's details against each of those questions relating to the scope. Please take time to read the individual questions. We have modified the questions and made them specific to this challenge and transforming food production and our objectives. So don't think that they're exactly the same as previous ones, because they might be in a different order and they might have different details. But overall, as per most of our competitions, we want your theme, your details, your summary. And the summary is used, as Tom said, to look and do the initial scope screen. But we also ask for a public description of that. We use that and publish that. Now, what we find is that you often write that because in a way that you understand and it's meaningful to you. What I might suggest is that you give it to somebody outside of your project group to read it and say, if you were given this, without knowing anything about us, would you be able to understand what we're doing? And that's really important for us and for you, because as we said about the objectives and exploitation, we want you to be successful. We want this to benefit you and benefit the UK economy. And investors and other collaborators look at the public description. It's what we've got that you've given us to showcase your project. So it's really useful to make sure that's succinct and something that other people would be able to understand. Obviously, what's key to you for a successful project, and the thing that people are concerned about, is their finances. One of the documents that you download when you're sent the link is a finance table. Each project member of the consortium, if it's a business, must fill in a finance form. The academic partner fills in the JES form, which is the academic finance form, of which all academic institutions are aware of, and we need the with counsel element of that. But there's a finance form for each business, which you put in your costs according to the different categories. Just really a reminder of the rates depending on the size of business you are and the type of organisation. You can have people in your consortium who don't claim grant. They might bring some expertise, they might bring management or knowledge, they might be contributing free of cost to you. They can be there. You just need to fill in, make sure that you're entered all the details and put that they're non-grant claiming and that their values go in as 0. But they can do that. But they do need to fill in a form saying so. And as I just said, each partner must fill in the form, and all the finance forms must be uploaded to that FTP site before the deadline. Now, there are lots of different costs that you can claim for. This actually becomes more relevant when you start to fill in the form. So I'm going to briefly take you through this, because it might not be so applicable today. But do remember to come back and reference this when you're completing in your forms. So each style of finance that's available has a separate tab. So things like labour costs, the amount of staff working on it. And staff really are those who are paid by you, who have PAYE and pension. But you can't claim for things like dividends, bonuses, or any non-productive time. Also be aware that if you're charging, I don't know, £1,500 a day for somebody's time, we will look at that and we will compare it to the industry benchmarks for the expertise that you're claiming for. So be realistic in your funding claims and what you're putting against the personnel that are working on the project. Overheads, there's 2 ways of doing this. The most simple is to take 20% of your labour costs and have a straight value against your overheads. If you have specific overheads, do maybe contact in advance to make sure they're eligible, but sometimes people do have facility needs or particular needs, and we will accommodate those. We don't fund infrastructure, so bear that in mind. And again, there's a form, and each page will calculate that for you. If you have any difficulties, then get in contact with our support service. And there's basically a tab on the finance form for each of the different areas, and there's guidance with it. If you've got any unusual costs that are very relevant to your project, then just make sure that you put them in the other costs area. They are often eligible, but we just need to know what they are. And don't double count it, please. And these are a list of some of the things that are not eligible costs. And again, it's worth referring back to the funding guidance when you and your partners come to fill in the form. So as I mentioned, academic partners fill in a JES form. So a JES form is the academic funding application system, and any academic institution will normally have a department who is aware of that and can help you through the system. And we need the statement from them. I'm just going to go back. We have an output form from that, and you upload that rather than them filling in an independent finance form themselves. And again, academic institutions are quite aware of this, but they get like 100% of their contribution against the project. And there is a process that most academic institutions are aware of to put their costs in. If you haven't worked with an academic institution before but you want to, then ask them and get an advice early on about how they fill in the forms. There is a helpline, and we need the relevant details from them, but they will be able to help you specifically on the JES side. So I'm going to show you this slide again. Don't forget, do it early. Do it thoroughly, do it early, and get it in. Then if there is a difficulty, you've got time to sort it out. So you apply with that little green button, and then you will be sent an email to a site. So you get that email the following day with your email address and a log-on details, and you'll be presented with a screen that looks like this when you log on. It's got all the relevant documents. It's got the application form and the finance forms. And you download them from there, and then you also upload, and there's a little right-hand area that you click on, and then that will allow you to upload your forms. What we find sometimes is you might be, in advance, you might have to work really hard, and let's say you've got your application in a week before, and then suddenly somebody has a new idea or they want to add something to it. You can't download the form, but what you can do is amend your version of it, which you will have, and you can upload again. And we always take the last timed and dated application and finance forms that are named, and we download those. There is a naming convention, and please pay attention to the naming convention so that you get it right. The site is effectively scraped electronically, and it will look for documents with the right naming convention. If you don't use that, again, you might deem yourself ineligible. Your application might not look like it's been completed properly, or it looks like you've missed some finance forms. So again, please just look at the guidance and the file names. And then you upload those documents. As Tom said, assessment is really important, and the first thing we do is obviously do that first eligibility check. So we'll look at your value of your finances, the value of your project, and whether your project is in scope. And then it will get sent for assessment. All applications are sent to an independent assessor, and standard process is that we have 5 independent assessors per application. So again, don't expect people to necessarily know the intricacies of your business. Make sure you're clear and concise. And like most things that we do in life, getting somebody else to look at it before you submit is really useful. Keep them engaged. If it was you, would you want to fund this project? What would you think about it? For bilateral competitions, it is a standard process, but it's obviously slightly different here. So for the UK and for China, we both independently assess our projects. For China, there's an expression of interest on the Chinese side, which is a part of their process, and that's done slightly earlier in the timeline. So if you're working with your Chinese partners, make sure that they've completed that and that they've been successful in that. And if we get given that list, we will make that available. So, but it is up to you to make sure your Chinese partners are doing the right things on their side. Then each host nation will assess the applications independently and draw their quality line. And then we'll have a joint review meeting where we compare the applications, make sure that we've got all the information from both sides of this 2+2 model. And then we'll have a joint sort of quality line and assessment decision. Because it's the industrial strategy and because we've got this program, we do reserve the right to take a portfolio approach. If we had 10 project submissions all on the same topic, it's either very, very important and we need to fund a lot of it, or actually we might decide that we want to take a broader approach and take projects and proposals that meet all the objectives of the challenge. But we will do that across the Chinese and UK funding partners. And then there will be the joint outcome and award. If you're successful, which I hope you are, then you'll be notified and you can go in and download the feedback, which is available 4 weeks after the notification period. And then the lead partner can distribute that amongst others. To start a project, then you do need one other extra thing that you can do after you're successful, but we would suggest that you start that now as you build your project consortium, is to have a collaboration agreement. We can't fund any projects who haven't completed that step. But that's about your IP, that's about your management, and we leave that in your hands. There are some sample documents available on our website, and other people will be able to provide those. But a collaboration is between you and your partners, and therefore we leave that for you. And then just to be aware, especially if you're new and you haven't had one of our grants before, grants are paid quarterly in arrears. So it does mean, especially if you're a smaller company or one that has to think carefully about their cash flow, that you have to be able to fund yourself for that first quarter until you're paid. So that's something to bear in mind, and that claims can be subjected to independent audit. And again, there is an audit document, an independent accountant's report at the end of any project. So do factor these into your timelines. And we do monitor on a quarterly basis, and you'll get assigned a monitoring officer. So everything that we do for normal UK competitions, particularly on the UK side, will remain the same from that monitoring and grant payment side. So there is a contact details there. The support service are very, very good at dealing with those financial inquiries. Anything around scope will be fed through to the team and to Tom. And our partners here, the Knowledge Transfer Network, are freely available to support you in your networking. They know how our processes work, so you can talk to them again as well. So that's the process side of things from me.
Thank you very much. So if we could grab Tom up on the stage as well, and just while Tom's, we'll do some questions. Just to show there's a slight change to the programme. So the Chinese perspective will be covered particularly by Dave and John in the case studies, who have been actively working in these sorts of projects with the Chinese collaborators. There are a number of people just to mention. Glenn Noble, who's part of Innovate UK, is based in Beijing, so couldn't be here today, and it wasn't technically possible to connect him. And then Janet Gledis and Ben Morley are part of the international team in Asia, who are also great points of contact. So if you have specific questions about collaboration in China, those are great people we can pass on their details to introduce them to you. Ian Cox, who has also been working a lot with China collaborations over the last couple of years, is on his way. He's just hit London. There's been a major delay on the East Coast line, so he should have been here at 9 o'clock. He's just arrived in London, so he is on his way. So he will be here for lunch and the afternoon session, which is Ian always turns up for a free lunch anyway. So that would be normal. So great opportunity. Thank you for all the introductions. Now we'll take questions up to the refreshment break, and questions about the scope and the application procedure that you've heard, and we'll take any from online as well, if there is any. So, any questions? Okay, we'll start at the back. We'll get to on through. And if you use the mic, because it's been picked up on the webcast today. Fantastic.
Hi, I've got one question on the scope and one question on the process. First, on the process, you mentioned the EOI phase in China. I wonder if you could just tell us about the deadline for that and what inputs will be required from the UK partners.
Very good question. I don't actually have the date to hand. We are waiting. We've got a visit out to China with our team. Our director's going out in a couple of weeks' time, and we're just going to firm that up. But it's done. So the Chinese element actually run opportunities as a cohort. So there are about 20, I think, opportunities. And the EOI will be the same for all of them. And we believe it'll be November, December time. And then they get told well in advance. And as soon as we get notified, we will tell you. But I don't have that date to hand. But we do know that we need to find it and confirm it, and we will communicate it to you.
Thank you. And then the sort of part
Part
two.
Okay.
Just a question on the scope, again from the Chinese side. Is it sort of directly reflective of the UK scope, particularly in terms of the closeness to commercialisation of the technologies proposed?
Yes, it's as close as we could get to different funding organisations, so they are completely aligned. So we haven't designed any conflicts in the scope process, so everything should go as smoothly as possible. And I know if you look at my inbox, the amount of emails that I have, because if you look at the Chinese scope, the only bit of English language is my email address. So the amount of people who are contacting me about from China about things that are quite close to commercialisation and wanting to be linked to the UK scope is quite considerable. So yeah, there's a lot of alignment there.
Thank you.
Question from John?
So, yeah, I think maybe, did you have... Yeah, that's what I thought.
Thank you. Just basically answering just additional information I got from my side from Trans Partners that I think the EOI deadline is 27th of November.
Thank you.
But that's not coming from the official, it's just coming from me. So that's what we find out contacting Chinese government. So that's what we know for now. Yeah, so maybe help with that. And I do also have questions.
That was sneaky.
So the first thing is the overlapping of funding. So basically our company getting quite a few fundings from Innovate UK in the past few years, and we're currently having one right now. By the time we're submitting the application, the project we're doing, which is funded by Innovate UK, is not going to finish until end of March. So in terms of application, there will be overlapping between the two funding. Is that going to be a problem?
No, in general not. I mean, obviously we wouldn't double fund the same project.
It's a totally different project,
Totally
yeah.
different project. No, that's fine. It's when I mentioned about if you hadn't completed claims or submitted accountancy reports, that's really for projects who've, maybe finished 6 months ago or
Yeah.
a year ago.
Yeah.
Active projects, that's fine.
Great. Then second one is the 30% claim from the research institution. We are working with a couple of universities in the UK, and so the 30% is the overall, for example, the project is £1 million, and as a company we can claim up to 50%, which is £500,000, and that's 30% claimed by the research institution. Is that on top of the 50%? No, it's including the
Yeah, so let's say your grant is £1 million. Your academic institutions as a whole cannot claim more than 300,000. So that's 30%. If you have one academic institution, they could claim up to all of that.
Yeah.
If you have two or more, they have
to
to share it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Did John have a question first, or?
I might have missed it. Is it a single application, the same application that goes to China and the UK, or is it two separate applications that somehow have to knit together? And who checks for the knitting togetherness?
So it is two separate applications. We would want to have described through your application where you knit together. So in the narrative of all the questions, that would be expected. But it's two separate applications, and that's why your number that you get given when you get sent the application form is really important, because we marry up the two numbers. So often you're asked for what's the name of your competition, and they must be the same. Normally that's the guidance. And again, if you can quote another number, if that's relevant, you can give your number to your Chinese partners, and vice versa, and that's normally how it works.
Yeah. And just to add, the reason why they're not the same applications, because some of the questions that we will ask is, where will the value? Why are you getting money from the UK state, and where's the value going to come to the UK? Which I doubt the Chinese will be asking the same questions. So we will score it. It will be scored and it will be ranked, and if we think it's fundable and it's eligible, then it gets taken over and we compare the lists with China. And then when we're doing that process, so we have. So normally, you apply to us, we score everything, here's our list, here's who we want to fund. That's relatively simple, yet complicated. When we do bilateral funding, both organisations will have a list, and then when we meet, we will decide which ones, where the overlap is, and which ones we fund.
So it's a bit of a double jeopardy.
No, they're put together. You have to, yes. So, I mean, I think the key is that in both countries, regardless of where you are, normally there is like a quality line. So you have to, so the UK application must be above the quality line, and the Chinese application must be above the quality line. And that's the standard process. Are you looking at those and making sure they're all the same? I wouldn't want to say, but we if there's a very strong case and they're around the quality line, then there might be some discussions with our bilateral partners. But that's the process, really. If you fall way below the quality line on both sides, then you won't be funded.
Thinking about the ranking.
Yeah, and that's why we have a joint meeting with them in order to do that, so that we agree, and that's when we take the portfolio approach and we look at the whole application portfolio we've been given.
Question from Mike.
Thanks. I've got two very separate and different questions. I'll ask them individually. The first is, you said that this is mainly for increased UK business investment and to improve R&D capability in the UK. But then you also want one Chinese business and a Chinese academic institution R&D outfit. So does Innovate UK basically fund the UK part and China funds the Chinese part? Okay.
Exactly, that's it. Good.
Thanks. All right, that's very clear. The second question is on the IP side. I believe until very recently, if you went with IP, for example, if you got a Chinese R&D outfit to work on your technology, they could work on it all, but they're not even allowed to share legally any findings or development from that R&D. So basically all your IP is tied up in China and doesn't even get shared with you. Is that still the case, or have things changed?
I'm not an IP expert, so but where we've been advised, because we had some discussions around things like data sharing, that where you've got that you work with your counterparts to iron out and decide these questions and what do you need to know from each side. And then if there's a need, we will help you if there's a specific data need to overcome, because data tends to be the most common one. So then we can approach the Chinese or help you to unpick some things on a case-by-case basis. We don't have a team to do that. We have just been advised that if you run into difficulties, we will look at them at a case-by-case basis. But IP agreements generally, from any of our projects, we ask you to get legal advice and IP advice from your perspective, because this is a business decision and we can't advise you, like we wouldn't on your own accounts and things like that. We can't advise you on the collaboration and the IP arrangements that you have with your foreign counterparts.
All right, but I thought the whole point, this has been talked about, this China relationship and a grant, for quite a long time. It's been delayed, I think maybe even up to a year. I went with the Innovate UK mission to China, which was really good, very insightful, and thank you Innovate UK for that. And they said they were holding off until these issues had been resolved. But from what I'm hearing from you, they may not have been resolved.
We did attempt to resolve them wholesale, and that's why we've been told to look at each project on a case-by-case basis. If we had tried to resolve communicating data with China from a challenge perspective, we would never have proceeded, because obviously you can understand that's a massive piece, and it might be that there's only one element of your project that causes you concern, and that's where we've said that we've been advised by the UK government and by MOST to look at this on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Yeah,
Dave and John will mention that in their case studies with their specific experiences. We take a question from the front, then we'll go to the web.
You may almost have answered the question, but I presume legal costs are in scope, therefore, possibly for an application. And secondly, maybe there's a part missing here, because if you're trying to encourage companies and academic organizations to collaborate with China, and people don't know who the specialist universities may be over there who specialize in agriculture, etc., ditto with organizations who are looking to collaborate, maybe something like this online with the Chinese, if they're holding similar events, something like this translated from a Chinese event would show you who's initially interested from the Chinese point of view. Otherwise, there's a lot of time needed to figure out who over there cold calling Chinese organizations and universities might be tricky.
Is that what you're picking up this afternoon?
Yes, I mean, one of the aims of today is to find the networks. A lot of the people here will already have contacts. So we know that from previous Newton-rounded funded projects, those relationships do take time. So we can help. There's a list of people that are working in Innovate based in China to connect people where we can have use explicitly. If you use the LinkedIn profile to look for someone specifically, then that can be used and shared to try and find people, identify it. We'll also get a number of people, Chinese partners, looking for consortia contacting us and through that, and we'll try and make the connections as much as possible. There has been Ian Cox, who is on his way, has been on a number of trips, so they have a lot of contact points, as with people like Dave Ross and people that have worked previously. And a lot of the academic institutes in the UK have very strong relationships with counterparts in China. So,
and would legal costs be in scope for an application potentially?
There are eligible costs that you can claim. For example, I think you can go up to £7,000 of IP costs within the cost, but you have to look at it specifically to check that it is. But yeah. Right, if we just go to the webcast, see if there's any questions there, and before we come back to the room.
Need to have been registered for a minimum amount of time before being able to apply?
They don't have to be registered for a minimum amount of time. We do an eligibility check early on to make sure that companies, there's what's called an undertaking in difficulties. So, but if your company accounts are less than 3 years old, that effectively exempts you. I think it's the 3-year period. And if our normal rules say that we will accept applications from businesses that are not yet registered, on Companies House, but to receive the grant funding, they must have registered. So, if you haven't yet registered, you would be expected to before you were actually in receipt of any grant funding.
Okay, and one more question online. Can we apply with projects that are already underway?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Can we apply with projects that are already underway?
I maybe missed the nuance of the question, but if you can't apply with a project that's already being funded, but if you have partners or businesses that are already being funded, but this is a new project, then yes, you can apply.
Yeah, and I just want to say, yeah, that's completely correct. But the whole point of funding from UKRI and Innovate UK is not to subsidise R&D activities that are already going ahead or will already go ahead. It's to accelerate collaboration and really, push the boundaries. So, it's got to be something that probably wouldn't happen without the money. And when you look at the application form, you've got to get a high score and actually articulate the additionality of the money coming from UKRI.
Another question from the room, just at the back. 2.
Hi, my name is Chris Davis. I'm here from FAI Farms. We develop systems for transparency in the supply chain for retailers. My question is the funding going to apply to aquaculture and fisheries as well as terrestrial agriculture?
I can take this offline and we can have a discussion about what the project is, but as long as you are aligned to the specific bullet points, as I said before, we outline some themes, and if it's not included those themes, then we can have a discussion about what bullet points you hit, and if you can hit that and you have partners in China who are also putting an application form in, then you should be good to go. But we'll take this offline.
Question at the back?
Yeah, so I'm asking regarding to the proposal. Let's assume that there is a Chinese and also a UK partner. They already have some kind of work together. Can they just propose one idea or like proposal in the same way but in 2 languages, basically?
Obviously, I think it might be useful to talk to colleagues offline about what that means. But yes, if it's what we are looking for is cohesive projects, and if it's a cohesive project with your partners in China and the UK, then obviously that's the ideal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can't see any more questions. Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. Nicole. We're doing very well for time. We're almost spot on time. So just before you go, you heard during Nicole's presentation about science and technology in practice. This is another funding call, and I'm sure you've enjoyed this briefing so much you're thinking, when can I get to another briefing event? Well, the good news is, very soon, 14th of November in Stoneleigh, will be an event focusing on the science and technology in practice. This is particularly looking at feasibility and demonstration projects in the UK. So this competition is about to be launched, and the briefing events will take place in Stoneleigh on the 14th and the 27th of November in York. If you are keen, there are places immediately available for the 14th of November, but there are only expression of interest to attend in the York event. So if that's something you want to know, and this is very much focusing on the end user, looking at feasibility of ideas and then demonstrating existing technologies, particularly in the field with end users. So if you're interested in those, speak to anybody at the KTN. We can give you the link to the Eventbrite site, and you'll be able to register for those free events. So I'll leave that up on the board. It is now time for a coffee break. The coffee's served just outside here. If we can come back into the room, and we'll start promptly at 11:30 for the case studies, and likewise with the webcast, go and get yourself a drink, and we'll start again at 11:30. Thank you. Welcome. Firstly, just like to say a huge thanks to all the staff from Newcastle who provided Cockle Park Farm as a perfect venue for what we're trying to do today.
There has never been a more important time for us to be innovative and creative and developing new ideas and new businesses. It's vital.
You will be escorted by 4 tour guides around the farm to see a whole variety of different exhibits, some of them indoors, some of them outdoors, live demonstrations, video presentations, all sorts of things. Have fun, and I'll see you in 4 hours.
This piece of machinery allows us to go through 100% field of clover and actually strip till into it. But certainly the sorts of data we've been collecting so far, we're able to keep yields up for a lot of those crops that we're working with. And that our clover platform's been established for a few years, we're hoping that we can put less and less nitrogen on, for example, versus our control. And we're already seeing organic matter build up. And if we can realise those sorts of gains, that has all kinds of impacts for mitigation of climate change, as you'll know.
The key to success is going to be sustainable productivity. If we can help farmers improve their bottom line through technology by supporting what the government policy are and what the consumers want, we're going to win. Everybody wins.
So we're just doing 3 points here, but the idea is that the drone will be able to cover a whole field very, very quickly. So we're looking at about 5 to 10 times faster than someone actually be able to walk to all those points in that field. Rather than the drone flying high and mapping a whole area, which you can do with a satellite anyway, we're using the drone to fly very, very low. So the drone descends to about 2-3 meters above the ground and takes a photo, and then it moves on to the next point and takes another photo. Those photos are sent straight back to the user's phone, and they can see them on there in real time. So then you can analyze the images. You can send them to an agronomist if you want information from them as well. There's no direct piloting involved. The drone just does it all automatically. Got the images? Yep. So Edwin can now show you the images we've just got from that point.
In the future, when we have the AI built into the app, the AI will then analyse the pictures we've got and will give you the results on the side of the field.
The agri-food sector, particularly on the farm end, is awash with data, but it's very fractured, it's in silos. In order to get the most value for the sector out of that data has to be pulled together, and that's the role Agrimetrics has.
What we've seen with recent political developments is the difficulty in attracting labour to harvest, to manage and process crops, for example. And what we're seeing now is an explosion of interest in autonomous systems in order to solve that problem. And today we've got a couple of examples of exactly that.
It's composed by several sensors that allows it to autonomously navigate in the field, a GPS sensor, which has a differential unit. There is a base station on the other side.
This is a terrestrial embodiment of the technology that was designed to get to Mars. This is the Earth version of the Mars rover, and it quite literally is measuring the Earth.
Coming from an academic background, we're used to seeing things done in the lab a lot. So it is really nice to see things on farm, and that it's not science fiction anymore, it's actually happening.
About 8 or 9 years ago, we set up the LED for Crops facility. We've looked at the impact of how modifying the blue, the red, the far red, the green and the UV within the spectra has an influence on the morphology of the plant, so that's how the plant looks, the nutritional content, the behaviour of insects. The most recent development at STC is the Vertical Farming Development Centre. That has 2 large growing chambers. Each has around about 120 metres squared of growing space.
On the screen here is a farm just up the road between here and Alnwick. What it allows us to do is identify difference, and then when we go and sit down with the farmer, we can use that sort of information to divide it up into management zones. So you can see on this darker soil, there's actually a lot more plant growth.
Asset 5 is a series of trailers and mobile laboratory type equipment, some of which you'll be seeing here today.
So the differences between the sensitive plant and non-target site resistant plant is very clear based on the visualization here.
This is what the dashboard looks like. So it's a cloud platform, you sign in and this is what you see.
A pansy sample came into the clinic. We used classic microscopy and culturing techniques to isolate ramularia.
The test system itself consists of 60 units, and each unit is 10 metres long and contains 4,000 litres of water.
So it's an automated spore trap, and we're monitoring the air. These will be deployed to enhance the visibility that we have, and again, the foresight that we have.
Representatives here from Innovate UK, KTN and Bays alongside the centres themselves. So really do make the most of that opportunity.
Together we can maximise productivity, sustainability, health, welfare, food safety and food security. So today is very much about showcasing some of the capability within the 4 innovation centres, and it's also an opportunity to learn a bit more about government's commitment to the industrial strategy.
I suppose the way I look at sensor technology, so they translate cow language into human language. They allow the stockman to know what's going on inside the animal. To fully utilise it, we need to have a way of capturing it practically. And I think to me that's what the beef monitor gives us.
The animal steps on, puts its head through the tombstone. While it's doing that, the weight's been taken and its ear ID has been read. It marries the weight and the EID together to put that with that animal. It then sends it up to the cloud-based technology. Upside of the beef monitor unit is it's eliminating the stress in the animal. The animal's freely going onto the unit to be weighed.
Facility. Right now they're being used to house pigs. We've got 4 pens in each room. We've got air conditioning systems so we can achieve a lot of individual temperature control if we wanted to give them different types of thermal challenges. We've also got individual feeders so we can feed them all different diets, different pens. We can install microphones for acoustic monitoring if we wanted, even looking at infrared cameras as well. And the room has 100% coverage so you can place the cameras wherever you want.
What we have here is a Qualisys gait analysis system with 12 infrared cameras which are mounted around the ceilings. These cameras work by sending out the IR signal which is then reflected back off our markers which are on Winnie. And based upon that, on those marker positions, this system can recognise each of those anatomical points. This facility enables us to do lameness scoring from anything down to mice. But we use it for anything from lambs and calves right up to large cattle and horses. We have a number of points on Winnie's back, along her head, and onto her back, and also on her legs and down to her hooves. So you can see how those points are moving. This technology was born in the motion capture video industry and film industry, so this is the kind of thing that the Avengers films uses.
This event gives us a great opportunity to bring all sectors of the supply chain together to see a variety of different capabilities, not just the one. So it brings it all together in one place.
I suspect that was the non-dairy and that was the dairy. Which is interesting because I like them more.
Once they're here, we load them onto the table and leave the room because of course the scanner works using x-rays. Once we've got them nice and straight in the cradle, you can see the nice straight spine. We use the bones as landmarks because they don't move about in the body. So here you can see the cross-sectional images. These are 5mm thick. The darker areas within the muscle here, that's the marbling that you can see.
There's computer scientists, there's data analysts, and there's agricultural technologies, and I can't think of another venue where you'd actually be able to marry those 3 things together.
As CEO of one of the centres, I'm very grateful for the organisers in bringing this event together, and actually provides us with a platform for both industry and academia across the UK to show the value of what we have to offer.
And we've made considerable strides in the last year, all the centres have, and it's just great to be able to catch up again on what we're all doing.
We've seen lots of great new facilities and capabilities across all the 4 centres, and I think there's been quite a buzz talking about the excitement in the industry and how innovation is going to help transform food production for the future.
So this opportunity to say, look, here's a little snippet of what we do, it kind of stimulates the discussions, and that's key to what we do.
Fantastic day out there, really good interaction between the delegates and the agri-tech centres, lots of enthusiasm, lots of talking, lots of discussion. You couldn't have asked for more.
Tom's still here, isn't he? And, yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, and we're about to start the next session. Okay, so in this session we'll have a couple of case studies from Dave Ross and John Crawford, who have had experience working in collaborative projects with China. Just to point out, we've got Ian Cox, who I mentioned was travelling down this morning. So Ian Cox from Innovate UK has also been leading a lot on the China relationships, so he's around for the rest of the day. Nicole's had to leave early for another event, but Tom's here for the rest of the day, and as are the KTN, so if you've got any questions relating to that, we can cover it as well. We know that was a short coffee break, but we're keen to crack on for the webcast, and there'll be a lot of time this afternoon during lunch and afterwards for further networking. So if I could introduce Dave Ross to come up to the stage. And over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks KTN for inviting me to present today. My name is Dave Ross. I'm CEO of Agri Epicentre, which is one of the 4 UK agri-tech centres. People have probably, or most people, sorry, good straw poll. I think KTN people did a straw poll earlier on. Apart from the webcast people, is anybody in the room not heard of the agri-tech centres? Okay, good. The flip side is most people have, which is great, so there is an awareness. So we were set up about 4 years ago to re-energise and recapitalise the base in agri-food research capacity and industrialisation and commercialisation. So we have 4 centres with different remits and different aspirations, but working together as a cohesive unit. So we have Agri Epicentre that I'll talk about in a moment. We have CHAP, which is Crop Health and Protection. Agrimetrics, a big data centre, and CL, which is the Centre for Innovation and Excellence in Livestock. And please, if you want any more information on any of these centres, get in touch with myself, any of the KTN people, Ian, or my colleague Rebecca at the back, and we can signpost you to the appropriate people. Okay, so that's the generics. I'm going to move into slightly more specifics now. When I was asked to do this talk, the context was around something called Smart Farm, which is something we've been working on intermittently, well not intermittently, consistently for the last year and a half. And we've had a lot of learnings from that I'm hoping to pass on some messages to people that might want to apply for funding, and some of the key things that we needed to do to make sure that it was a seamless collaboration with our Chinese partners. So what I'm going to do now, though, is reinforce some of the messages that were made earlier on by earlier speakers regarding the opportunity in China and how it's actually growing. Some people may be aware of this, so I apologise if I bore people in the audience and people on the webcast, but some of you may not. So I think most people are aware of the population statistics and the projections, but one thing that's quite important in this particular graph is the population of what's deemed to be the middle class, however that's defined, but the vast increase over the next 10, 11 years of the middle class, and therefore with disposable income that can be attributed to all different types of consumer products and food products. And therefore, the dietary influences or the dietary changes that might be manifest as a result of that are possibly reflected in this next graph that shows the food demand over the next coming years. And the key take-home message from that is you can currently see that the food demand for both China and India in about 2010 was about 10% of global. Moving forward, you can see that rises to 40% of global, which is an incredibly high increase in terms of food demand. So that's the big picture. another graph at the bottom. I do apologise for those people that can't see at the back. It might be slightly small, but the take-home message from that image at the bottom is that the per capita consumption of protein is relatively stable and growing slightly. So if you mirror or reflect on that particular graph and the composite of the first graph, you can see that there's a large increase in protein and animal-based products in China over the next number of years. And that has to be something that has to be delivered either internally or imported to satisfy China's needs. So, in terms of agricultural growth, this is a slide that I've grabbed from a source which is at the bottom, but the message on this particular slide is the annual growth. If you look at the left-hand, the y-axis on here, you'll see that the annual growth is in a number of percentage points in each decade. So you're looking at a total factor productivity, which is a metric of growth of agriculture, being in a number of percentage points over each decade since the 1960s. And the trend, although it's slightly downwards at the moment, you can see some of the inferences from here. For example, the land use or inputs in land is actually going slightly negative. The sown area, as it's called, the blue, is actually increasing. Now, if you read the small print at the bottom, that is a consequence of things like double cropping or being able to effectively harvest 2 crops in one calendar year or 1 calendar year. But the trend is still upwards, and a few percentage points each year and every decade is still a huge increase in food output. And that is obviously trying to reflect the demand in China itself. This graph here indicates almost the gap. So even with that total factor productivity modelled going forward, you're looking at only satisfying 72% of that growth internally. So there's, from the perspective of these data, my understanding is that there's going to be a lot of pressure to feed that population with what it needs or what it aspires to need over the coming decades. And therefore there's an opportunity to look at the whole range of different capacities and skill sets that exist in this room and on the webcast to help deliver that. So I'm staying big picture at the moment. So one of the things in 2015-2016 that was published was the Communist Party's 13th five-year plan. And that reflected a number of different challenges that the country had. And it's again summarised in this very simple image here. And what that shows is what the targets that have been set over that 5-year period. It doesn't reflect agriculture at present. I'll come to agriculture in a minute, but you can see that there's an aspiration to get to a significant R&D spend, urbanisation of the population, which is then what that's doing is making the scale of agriculture as a consequence potentially larger. So holding units are becoming larger. There's an opportunity for larger scale investment. There's an opportunity for intensification, for modern farming practices to come into play, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the overall picture. But from an agricultural context, I've pulled a few statements from a few commentators on the 13th five-year plan and summarised them there on the right. You'll see that there's, if I can put my glasses on properly, I'll see myself. The specific agriculture ones are looking at improving productivity of its grains and cereals and effectively restructuring, as I mentioned earlier about the urbanisation, the potentials to restructure and create potentially scale that produces more productivity. And again, a lot of other things that are focus projects, but you can start to see where the reflection of the current ISCF TFP call fits potentially within the number of key challenges at the bottom here. We're looking at seeds, agriculture innovation, intelligent agriculture, and circular agriculture. And again in here, it's sustainability. There's a big net zero push, I think, in China as well at the moment. Anyway, moving from very high to the very low, and focusing on a particular project that we've been involved in, which was called Smart Farm. Now, the genesis of this was about 2 to 3 years ago, where we tried to establish a relationship with Chinese partners, and one of the thoughts we tried to entertain was to try and get UK technology, or start to get UK technology developed and used in China. And we created a kind of roadmap. Now, there was something called the UK-China Flagship Challenge Expert Working Group, which is a little bit of a mouthful. And it was overseen, it was under the auspices of a generic MOU. Now, these are a selection of quotes from the Flagship Challenge Expert Working Group, and please do not fall asleep, but I just want to take some salient messages from these quotes. So what it's looking for is innovation-driven development. Now, this whole Smart Farm initiative precedes the ISCF TFP, or effectively ran just prior to the TFP happening. So I'm seeing a lot of parallels in what we tried to initiate on Smart Farm with the TFP. But the focus of it was on smart agricultural collaboration. So it's trying to get new tools and technologies, systems, processes, designs, ideas, etc., into Chinese agricultural production to lift productivity and sustainability in meeting the social demands as well. So that was the aspiration. More specifically, it was looking at the modernization of China in agriculture and seeing where they could use technologies effectively and demonstrably to increase productivity. We, in the UK, are recognised as being at the forefront of agricultural technology development. We have a leading position in the world. We do punch above our weight a bit, and we do have a respect, and we command some authority internationally. And that is reflected in a lot of the discussions we've had with the Chinese over the past 2 or 3 years. They do see that we have something to offer. And I'm very grateful that the TFP programme has recognised that with China and the potential opportunities. Again, I mentioned about net zero. This was reflected again in the text. So climate change, population growth, and shortage of agricultural resources. The UK perhaps doesn't face the same challenges in the same way, but we certainly, climate change is very high up the UK agenda at present and moving higher. So that was the overall. So what is Smart Farm? So Smart Farm started out as a kind of holistic interpretation of how you actually grab nutrients from any commodity or product, and it feeds through various supply chains. So you're taking plant material, either feeding it into the human food supply, or you're moving it through different animal protein outputs or animal milk, etc., and you're creating a food product. And the idea behind it was to try and see where the opportunities lay, where the, let's say the variability in production that was a rate limiting step, both in the UK and China. So we looked at this overall, and this was a kind of the mechanism whereby we tried to look at where we could fill gaps with UK knowledge. And these are some of the quotes from, I actually borrowed them from my chairman of my company, so I do apologise, they're not my quotes, but I think they're still topical and relevant. They're about a year old, so they may have changed slightly, but these show some of the numbers for the UK and how the UK in itself has quite significant variability in its performance from the top producers down to the average producers in various commodities, and can we see that similar reflection in China? And therefore, if we can optimise that variability and actually produce more from the same resource, we have almost a triple win. We have a productivity boost. Usually when you have a productivity boost, you have a climate change positive effect as well, and there's an economic effect. So that was the overall picture for Smart Farm. So we took our first tentative steps in Smart Farm. We called it 1.0. We ran from 1 to 4 was the grand ambition and aspiration. And we got a few partners involved in the project, and these partners were quite willingly giving up some of their time, their resource, their company products to try and get something established. So we looked at an organisation called NERCITA, which is a national organisation for research, technology and agriculture. We borrowed, in inverted commas, some of their farmland, and we started to put in UK technology to see what it could actually do or how we could measure. And again, it was just first tentative steps. So we looked at earth observation, combination with drone technology, et cetera, to try and understand what the variability in the performance of their field-grown crops were. And these are just a selection of examples through time. That's actually this year's data, running through till June, showing the variability in the field for a very straightforward metric called NDVI. But we looked at a whole range of other measures on that field, both earth observation and local drone-based or ground-based observations in a geospatial context. We also we looked at the again, yield monitoring in the UK has been something that's been around for quite some time, but yield monitoring in China is earlier in its gestation period of adoption. So what we wanted to do was to pull in some UK technology here and adapt it for Chinese machinery and show that we can actually do something with yield maps and relate that to the crop data coming through the growing season as well. So we grabbed data, we installed yield monitors on combines, grabbed lots of data, pulled it all together, and we've reported, and we will be reporting, I'll be reporting in Beijing on Friday of this week, the results of this project. One of the other things we looked at Smart Farm 1.0 was the early understanding of how we could look at UK technology to look at fruit harvesting or crop harvesting. In this case, it's tomatoes, to see what we could do together, because there's a lot of capacity in China in automation and robotics. What have we got in the UK that's different and adds value? So we explored that and got some results back from that. And one other key piece of technology we looked at was something called the Agri rover, which is a development that was based originally on the Mars rover, the vehicle that went unmanned to Mars. And it's used in an agricultural context, but it had a real-time soil analysis package on it that could actually gather nutrients or the nutrient value at each point in the soil by taking an instantaneous measurement. So we looked at that technology, and we took that into account when we're looking at the growth and the harvest of the crop. So that was looked at. Oh, I finished. Sorry, I haven't. I've missed a couple of slides, and the reason I say that is that's not a deliberate. That's an accidental thing, because I picked up on a couple of things earlier on, and I wanted to have actually had a couple of slides that have gone for some reason. Anyway, I wanted to pick up on the previous questions about IP and data sharing and non-disclosure, etc. So we, because we involved commercial companies in the UK that had UK proprietary IP and technology, we needed to make sure that when we engaged, we had clarity across both of the countries about the understanding of IP, non-disclosure, and data and equipment sharing. And we got some very good Chinese equipment involved in this project as well. So we set up a non-disclosure agreement that allowed us, under restricted conditions for the area that we were looking at, to share data across both countries. And that was both geospatial and soil data, which is actually quite difficult, almost impossible, under the emerging Chinese legal arrangements for geospatial data. So we managed it. So under restricted circumstances, I suggest that one of the things that you think about for your applications going forward is you ensure that you have accounted for this time budget in your project to agree the arrangements whereby you have a non-disclosure, you have arrangements whereby you can share information and data, and you have arrangements for your IP. China has its own understanding of legal positions. People talk about the Great Firewall of China, etc. You have to understand how your project and your data might fit within those restrictions. And there are mechanisms whereby you can both share data under restricted circumstances. But I do plead with everyone that if you're looking at a data-focused project or proprietary IP, etc., from the UK, that you ensure that you account for, there was a question asked earlier on about this, that you account for this in your project development plan, because it's a very important, it did burn a lot of my time, personally, making sure we had all these arrangements in place before we could do all the sexy stuff that you saw earlier on. So I would say that that's my first part. And the second one, I would say that in terms of working with our Chinese partners has been fantastic, but it's really important to build, curate and cultivate relationships with your partners in China. It's so important to do that and to build trust and understanding and respect of each other's capabilities. I'm sure John will reflect that in his talk as well, but having that understanding and key focus is really important. We're really at the point now with a couple of our partners where we're looking at developing and commercialization of some of the technology and looking at potentially joint ventures or ways in which the UK can actually access Chinese market. So I've not much to say about that at the minute because there's some negotiations underway, but it's really important, again, that you spend time thinking about how that happens in a Chinese context. All the stuff at the beginning was great. The market opportunity in China is fantastic, but you have to be very cognizant of the points I've just raised earlier on. Okay, I think I've used up all my time. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Dave. We won't take any questions, but Dave and John are around during the networking as well, so it would be good if you've got further questions to find them. So next up is John, previously of Rothamsted and now with Glasgow, University of Glasgow. So I'll pass over to John.
Thanks very much. The reason my address isn't in the details of the meeting is I literally changed jobs yesterday. And it's mostly actually Innovate UK's fault because the last 5 years I've spent a lot of time thinking about this interface between the science and innovation at the technology, data and agriculture and food system interface, and fantastic challenges there and a massive, massive urgency to impact. So I also had to cultivate a Scottish accent, so I hope that is working okay for you. I think it was 4 years ago, I got a heap of money from the Science and Technology Facilities Council to run a thing called the Network Plus in China. This is Agri-Tech. Under the Newton Fund, it was an Agri-Tech Network Plus to look at ways of exploiting space-based technology, which we liberally interpreted the meaning of that in agriculture. The aims of the network specifically were to defragment a community of researchers and companies in the UK and in China to seek data and technology-driven processes for transforming the food system in China, but in a way that could be translated anywhere, because the challenges that China is facing are just the challenges we're facing everywhere else, except there's hundreds of people in China and it's huge, and so the problems are much bigger. One of the things that we set out from the outset, which wasn't part of the call actually, but we wanted to ensure that we achieved this with the Network Plus, was wherever possible to encourage collaboration between business and research, so that any of the innovations that we created might have a lifetime after the funding finished. Because it was Newton funding, we wanted to create lasting impact on the lives of farmers in rural China. And the best way to do that is to encourage self-sustaining solutions, which meant looking at ways of creating public-private partnerships, which in China is still a fairly new phenomenon. And I'll come to our experiences with that in a few slides. The other thing that we wanted to do was create this network, try and encourage lots of people to engage with the opportunities, but also to kind of disseminate as much as we possibly could. And what I should have done here is put the website address. But I've decided I'm going to circulate to the KTN a bunch of things to share to everybody that comes along, because I think, having heard the questions and had some discussions with individuals, there's things that we could share that might be we've got some resources that we could share that might be of use to you. Our partner in China was the China Agriculture University, and the reason for that was because they had undertaken a program to transform agriculture in China on a village-by-village basis. And so this was real on-the-ground transformation, working with farmers, delivering real major significant impacts on the ground in a very innovative approach that literally co-located researchers with farmers, co-created experiments, delivered them on the ground in China and in the village, and then disseminated the results. So it's a very innovative approach. The results have been published in Nature and Science and in the global press because it was so spectacularly successful, both in increasing the productivity of Chinese agriculture, but also reducing its environmental footprint, which again is a major focus of the call that we're here to listen to today. The challenge with the Science and Technology Backyard Programme is it's incredibly resource intensive. You've got to get a whole bunch of academics and PhD students and farmers together to do field trials, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of resource and effort. If you want to transform the whole of China's agriculture, the challenge then is, how do you scale up from those village scale interventions to the region and then the whole nation? And that's what we focused the Network Plus on. How can technology support the farmers, first of all, to transform what they do, and then to deliver that knowledge across the whole of China? And again, that's a common challenge, not just in China. It's exactly the same challenge that we have here in the UK, just the scales are different. I think the outcome of the Network Plus was better than I could have hoped for, in the sense that there was a lot of enthusiasm both in China and in the UK, despite the fact we had relatively small amounts of money to offer. We were able to set up a network of about 500 industry and academic participants, and this is the resource that I'd like to make available to you. I can say that now because it's at Rothamsted, and the people that will make it available to you are not here. But I'm going to commit their time on their behalf to open up that network. That was the point of doing this, was to create a resource for the UK. We funded 27 collaborative UK-China projects on a scale from about 30k up to 100k, from a few months, 3 or 4 months, up to about a year in duration. And in doing that, we supported 58 different organisations. So there's 18 UK academic organisations, 11 UK companies, 22 Chinese academic organisations, and 7 Chinese companies. And in the process, funded 10 UK-China public-private partnerships. It was kind of pioneering in the way that we delivered it, because we had to become a mini research council. We had to do a lot of stuff that hadn't been done before, particularly develop these protocols for public-private partnerships and all the issues to do with data sharing and IP. We had to sort that out as we went along. And it was a bit hair-raising at times. But the fact that there's quite a lot of people who were involved in the Network Plus here today proves that it kind of, I think it worked. One of the things that I think I'm most proud of what we achieved with the Network Plus was in the last year, having funded a whole bunch of projects all over the place in China, doing little pieces of the puzzle, we decided that we would open up a call to explore the potential for drawing all of that knowledge together in one place, to explore the possibility of creating an integrated platform for data collected at a range of scales that could in principle be used to deliver that scaling up from the village to the whole of China. And we were lucky to pull in a bunch of business partners to help with that, both in the UK and in China. And the main ones, I think, to mention are GSMA, who are the global association for the mobile and connected technologies industry, IBM Research UK, and China Mobile. And we put together a platform that can draw on a whole bunch of different types of data, including on-ground sensor data, farmer knowledge, UAV, satellite data, and field trial data, to deliver new kinds of knowledge that can support research, as well as particularly end users, farmers, and agronomists, and retailers for that matter. And as you can imagine, the kinds of challenges that we just heard Dave talk about in terms of data sharing, IP, and all that kind of stuff, we had to sort all that out, and the NDA route was the route that we followed. And having a company like China Mobile on board made it a lot easier because they seemed to know the rules. I'm not sure if they maybe made them up, but they seem to know the new rules on cybersecurity inside and out. And that is the major challenge. It's not that there isn't a reluctance to share between the UK and China. It's just that the new cybersecurity laws in China are seemingly very difficult to navigate. But China Mobile had clearly been all over it and knew how to deal with it. So in the end, with the platform and the individual projects, I think we had a kind of prototype solution for the potential to use the science and technology backyards as kind of data hubs, points where there's intense level of ground-based data and knowledge that can be used to calibrate and validate drone-based and satellite-based imaging and algorithms to advise farmers on a scale much larger than the STBs across the whole region and then subsequently across China. We just didn't have the time or the money to validate that upscaling, but in principle at least, we believe it's possible. Coming back to the point that Dave made about knowing your partners in China, I've been working in China now for almost 20 years, and the disparity between the rural and the urban environments is stunning. And therefore, I think you really need to know your customer base very well if you're trying to do something that you want to exploit in China, but also if you want to just create impact. So from my point of view, and what the Network Plus was about creating impact. And therefore, we co-created solutions with farmers and advisors in order that we made sure the relevance of the kinds of things that could be delivered. So, for example, the graphical user interface on the apps that we developed was co-created with farmers and advisors, so that the right level of technology and sophistication was in the app and suitable for uptake. Lessons learned. There's 3 slides here, and I'll try and go through them quickly because I know that we're running out of time. There is a desperate need to impact on the ground. Dave showed the data very nicely. There's an enormous challenge in China, and an enormous acceptance of the need to transform their food system in a way that we need to catch up on in the UK. So there's a really great opportunity for learning stuff by working with a system in China that's very geared up to delivering impact very, very quickly at the national scale. I've talked already about the contrast between urban and rural China, so that comes back to this communication thing with your partners. Make sure that you build up that relationship prior to putting in the project as much as possible, but certainly afterwards build in a lot of visits, get to know your partners. It involves drinking a lot of these little glasses of terribly strong alcohol. Don't think that it's just like sake, it's like whiskey, and it's incredibly strong, and I have been caught by surprise on several occasions. But that's part of the important getting to know each other kind of thing. The other thing is that I think I've said this also before, that the solutions that China needs are the solutions that we all need. And so it's automatically relevant when you do something in partnership with China that it can be delivered almost anywhere, particularly in countries where they're on a similar trajectory in terms of that middle class that is growing incredibly fast. So the other thing is don't sort of, if you've not been to China before, I guess a lot of you have, don't expect to go there with your widget and amaze people, because actually there's a staggering level of investment in China, and the quality and the standard of the science is outstanding. Which leaves you wondering, what on earth can we in the UK offer with our £5 million programme? I think where the opportunities are and where the challenges remain are how to, rather than deal with the challenges that the food system faces on a problem by problem basis, think about take a much more systems perspective. How do we combine technologies? How do we pull this stuff together to deliver the systemic transformation that is needed in China? There is huge appetite for public-private partnerships in China. When we first set up the Network Plus, there was kind of a disbelief, I think, especially with our Chinese partners, that there'd be any industry interested, but actually there was a lot. So I expect that if you want to contact business partners, if you need business partners, it won't be hard to find them. And we can help, when I say we, Rothamsted, can help with our database of potential partners. Coming to this point about navigating IP and getting support, if you're a company that wants to do something with China, I think if I was starting the Network Plus again, the biggest thing I'd do differently is I would engage with the CBBC, which disappointingly is not Children's BBC. It's the China-Britain Business Council, who have a base in Beijing, and they have operations across China. And for something like this, which is kind of a coordinated activity at the KTN level, I would humbly suggest that maybe the programme managers enter into conversation, if they haven't already, with the CBBC about providing a service to all of the projects to give you advice on how to approach the challenge of IP protection and data sharing, because that's what they do, that's what they have for breakfast, and they know what they're doing, and I was incredibly impressed by the support that we got, which unfortunately I didn't engage with until towards the end of the Network Plus. So if you're going to remember one thing about this presentation, that's my take home. So just on the data sharing challenges, I've sort of said this already. Even if you have an NDA in place, just be extremely careful that everybody seems happy. They might not be, because it might not have been referred up high enough within the organization to be signed off. And sometimes agreements can be made at one level, which turn out to be more kind of wishful thinking. And it's just part of getting used to knowing how to work across cultures. So just be aware that just because you have agreement doesn't mean it's all going to be great, it's all smooth. And the challenge is the complexity of the new cybersecurity laws, not the lack of any willingness to share and to collaborate. That's there. It's just how to navigate those cybersecurity laws. Everybody needs help with that. We got round it by involving a large Chinese company. There are other ways to get around it, and as part of the Network Plus and the STFC funding, Agrimetrics is one of the agri-tech centres that Dave mentioned, developed a platform specifically for dealing with this challenge of data sharing between the UK and China, which keeps the data secret, but allows integration to develop the analytics and the predictive capacity that you need, because actually most of us are not that interested in the data. What we're interested in is what we can learn from the data, and it's possible to extract learning from the data without anybody ever having seen the data. So and I have no financial interest in Agrimetrics. I was involved with Richard Tiffin in setting it up, but I'm not involved anymore. And I just suggest that you might want to get involved, you might want to contact Agrimetrics if you're worried about data sharing and you want to have an organisation that has a platform that's set up to facilitate UK-China collaboration, particularly with the data sharing thing. Have a chat with Richard Tiffin at Agrimetrics.
Thank you, John. We won't take questions again. John will be around, but any of those contacts you mentioned, we've got links to CBBC and Agrimetrics as well. So if you do want to contact those, if you don't get a chance to speak to John, let us know and we'll be able to introduce those as well. So obviously the highlight of this morning is this next talk, which is how to write a successful bid by me. So this is what you've all clearly come for, and many of you have probably heard this many times before. So I will fly through these. All these slides will be made available, but hopefully there's some useful links in here that you can then go away and hopefully help you towards your bids. So just to mention, obviously, KTN is part of the Innovate UK family. There's lots of different things, particularly relating to China. You would have probably encountered Enterprise Europe Network, who run various different trade missions over there, as well as DIT. So they're all part of government funding. The KTN is funded directly from Innovate UK, so we're not part of Innovate UK, so we can provide all the services that I'll talk to you free, because it's funded through via the taxpayer, through public funding, but we're not part of Innovate UK directly, so our advice is separate from Innovate UK. So that's why at certain points we will give you advice and guidance, but also at key points, things like relating to scope, we'd always advise you to get confirmation from Innovate UK via the helplines that you've seen already. So the KTN is all about making friends and influencing people. It's all about the network of networks, and obviously the companies we do are always looking to collaborate, and that's our aim, is to try and link it. There's 180 odd people in the KTN, 10 of us focusing on agri-food, but lots of other different sectors, and a lot of these competitions are often looking for new markets, new technologies, and it's all about speeding up the innovation to markets, to progress commercial opportunity and accelerate innovation. Looking for different sectors, looking for partners from different sectors to link into agri-food. And it's all about getting there quicker. So the ones that have collaborated with us have always often got to the market 1 or 2 years faster, if possible. But we also appreciate this is innovation. It doesn't always work, so companies need to be flexible and react to that. So the traditional collaborating in innovation sort of keys for success often look at it like this. This slide works really well for this core because it's a 2x2. This gets a bit complicated when it's not. But you often will have a company need. They will identify the need, a business need that's required, and often they will then look at a university to provide that R&D or technical expertise. That could also be other companies, but often from universities. And to drive that, you need funding, which is what this call is all about, to lead into collaboration and innovation with the whole aim to produce new products and services that can be commercially exploited, as well as increasing the research impact for the academic institute. So this fits really well with that. And Innovate funding fits a landscape of, we often use the phrase technology readiness level. So this was developed by NASA, where you go from feasibility at TRL 1 right up to commercialization at levels 9 and 10. And Innovate's sweet spot for funding is this a bit in the middle between 3 to 7. And in this specific call, as you heard from Tom, these are all about development stages. So really you're looking at TRLs 5, 6, and 7. So you're getting towards that point where you've gone beyond feasibility, you're looking to develop it and get closer to the market. But Innovate don't fund stuff that's ready for market. You're getting towards that end, but it's that latter stage of that sort of profile where Innovate fits well. So for a good proposal, the hallmarks of these various things, and we'll go through these each one and give you a few hints and tips around these to try and aim to sort of get you the best proposal that you can. Innovation. It sounds so easy to find something, and we've heard and we know that there's challenges are there, but you're looking for something that is clearly innovative. You need to be able to show that it's commercially, scientifically innovative, and how do you show that is using things like patent searches, looking at competitors, literature assays. You need to identify IP. We've talked about protecting it. You need to have a strategy. There is no right or wrong, but you need to think about how you're going to protect it and how you're going to distribute the IPR. That go through that. And it may be you're not sure where to look. Now, often many people have looked at patents, which we all know how difficult that can often be. Patent writers often design the words so that you can't work out what you're actually trying to protect. That's obviously one of the reasons why they do. But there is a really useful tool, if you haven't seen this, called the Gateway to Research tool. So this, that link at the bottom will take you through. This will show you and pretty much give you information on pretty much every project that's been funded by academic or Innovate funding bodies. So you can put in keywords, just for example on here, I put in the keyword soil, and you can see straight away we've got various precision mapping, diagnostic chips, all sorts of things. It will tell you who funded it, how big the project were, who were the key partners in there. If it's been collected really well, and sometimes it is, you'll even see what the outputs of a previous project were, and often what might be looking to exploit. So worth having a play at Gateway to Research just to see what you can find, to see what's been done already. Another really useful tool, and if you click through this data link at the bottom, I'll say all these slides will be made available. Every single project that Innovate UK, and for those of us that have been around when TSB existed, the precursor for this, every project that they've ever funded is available to see what has been funded. It's publicly funded money, so all the public descriptions that you heard about from Nicole this morning are available to see in a massive database. You can actually download it as an Excel if you want to crash your computer, but it is all available on a really nice data visualization tool, which allows you to search for regions, to find companies. And where I think it's really useful is you can look at companies, and what you will sit to see is what the public description was about that project. That's the bit that is in the public. It will tell you who was in the project, how much they were funded, and things like that. And this is an example of a small project that was looking at different form of insect control. But you can dig into it. You can look at all the people as. I use this as a nice example. This specifically for horticulture. This is Berry Gardens, who have a very active R&D pipeline. You can see the types of size of projects that they're doing, and you can actually see a list of all the projects that have been funded. This is a company that is clearly looking to innovate, developing robotic pickers and all sorts of things, and you can see all this. So if you're looking for partners, have a look on here, see what you can find, see what history they've got from an Innovate perspective. This is business-led R&D. So if it's going to be business-led, you need to have a strong business case. What is the need that the project will address? What is the size of the market? And the phrase that you'll often hear a lot of is, what is the return on investment? So what this is saying is, if we're putting taxpayers' money into this, When is that going to come back in money that's coming back to the UK? You'll need a return on investment if you're putting your own money in, which you will have to do in these types of projects. Another area that return on investment that was new to us, we work a lot at the moment with investors who are investing in companies. What they also want to see is when they're going to get their investment back, so as a company. But they said you should never forget about the return on investment for the end user to deploy your technology. If a farmer's got to spend £1,000 on your technology, when will he make that money back to pay off for that? They do that usefully with tractors and various things, but so that phrase return on investment is a really key one to keep thinking about. And if you haven't got a market that is going to return that money on investment, you don't have a business, you don't have an opportunity. And it's fit. The one that's, sorry, just gone a little bit at the bottom, but clarify how your project proposal fits with your business plan. It's very important that we often talk to companies that think of a project, but it actually, how does it fit into the company, particularly SMEs? You sometimes need to separate the project from the company. And they've got to be complementary, but you know, it's often an SME that's jumping from project to project isn't actually a company, it's just jumping around from project to project. So you want to believe and work with partners that genuinely believe that want to take that technology to the market and are in it for the long term, not just the short term of the project. Now, I probably should have changed this example because of the size, but it's a good one. Costing of a project is really key, and this simple table is something that's well worth doing right at the beginning of when you're trying to put together. So this is an example of a £2 million project, and you can see here it's got a different size of 3 businesses, 1 medium, 1 large, the university and an agri-tech centre in there. So as the question that was mentioned before, the total eligible cost of this project is 2 million, and therefore the total research costs can only be £600,000 in this particular example. So it's got to be, can't exceed 30% of the total eligible costs. Now in this call, they were looking at different stages and they can look at different intervention rates. Now, as Tom mentioned this morning, these projects for this call are all at the developmental stage. So that is 45% maximum for SMEs and lower accords. So, but the bit why I wanted to put this up for and why I wanted to use it as the example is this is the grant, and again, this project, the grant is capped at 500,000 in total, but the project contribution is the money that needs to be evident in the company has that. So we see a lot of people that the R&D manager puts this project forward, and this example, the SME's done this, was great, they're going to get a £364,000 grant. But what they also have to show is they need to have £156,000 worth of money or evidence to show they've got income to be able to complement that. Now, if your financial director sees this the day you're about to submit it, he's usually not very impressed when you've just agreed that you're going to give £156,000 of your company funds away in a project like that. So it is really important to do this breakdown early on, because it means that every partner sees what their grant expectation is and what their contribution expectation is. Particularly in these development stage ones, because the intervention rates are a lot lower in here, 45, 35 and 25. So that means the industry are putting in a lot more money than normal for an earlier stage project. So really key to sort of focus on that sort of simple breakdown of the cost before you get into the detail to make sure that people understand the overall commitment. A credible plan. So everybody's used to these days, particularly with anyone that's been involved in EU projects, the use of work packages. But this is a development. So you've got to think about the D within these projects, demonstrate the necessary skills and resources that you have available, and make sure the management structure and plan are nice and clear and can be shown that you can manage it. It's great to have advisors. It's great to have a clear plan. You will be assigned a monitoring officer, and it's important for the technical leads of the project to liaise with that monitoring officer to make sure a project smoothly goes through. And that obviously has additional challenges when you're doing a bilateral, because you need to make sure that both halves of the projects are also running in tandem and elements of that. So don't forget the management time required to sort of manage a project is significant. Wider impact questions. I mean, the Transforming Food has already identified about moving towards zero emissions for 2040, etc. But there are always lots of wider environmental plans, and there's a Horizons tool that is accessible that makes companies and makes consortia think about the other benefits, which might be economic, social, or environmental. Companies use this when they're large enough to focus on these things, and it makes you think about a better understanding of the market opportunities from these different perspectives, social and political and those sorts of areas. And it's sometimes useful. It's downloadable. It was developed several years ago, but it just makes you think about those wider aspects, and there are questions that relate to this. So it is good to have a think about, particularly do it as a consortium. Rather than just the lead person doing this, it's always good to think about other aspects. And the hallmarks of a good proposal really come down to the right consortium. Why have you got these partners? What are they doing? Assessors that read this really recognise passengers. If you've got somebody in there by name and they're not actually doing anything of value, Innovate don't like that. Why do we give money to people because they just want them in there? They must have a clear, active role and show some benefits. They also need to show what they're going to get out of it. Why are they putting the company's effort into it? What do they expect from the future? Which are questions you need to ask. So that's really important to look at that. There is no set guidelines on whether or not a partner can be a subcontractor or a partner. But the key bit is a subcontractor is getting all their funds paid for by, say you subcontract some of the work. They're not putting any skin in the game. They're not putting any of their own money. They're just getting paid for a service. Now, for sometimes that's very appropriate. I want this company to make this widget and that's all I want from them. But if you start to have subcontractors that are adding more that is more intellectual and they're not part of the collaboration agreement and they're not part of the consortium and they're not putting their own funds in, then questions get asked to the assessor, why is that company in there as a subcontractor, not as a genuine partner? So it's really think about that of why it is. There are good reasons why there should be, but also equally make sure it's well justified. Cross-sector partnerships are something that Innovate particularly like, and bringing in technologies from a sector is always very attractive, and so is making sure you've got end users in these projects is also very valuable. I think agri-tech is an area that adoption is very slow, and we see a lot of the problems with adoption is that the farming community aren't involved in projects, so when they actually see it, it's quite a bit too late. So trying to get end user groups in there, or demonstration farms, or monitor farms, all sorts of things, different opportunities, but think about whether or not you should have an end user in there. This has been covered a number of times, so it is very important to look at the definitions of the different size companies. So a clear need for support. If you come to Innovate and say, this is such a brilliant idea and we're making loads of money, they'll go, well, why don't you spend your own money and do this then? Why are you asking for taxpayers' money? So explain why you're doing that, why you're taking that risk. It may all be down risk, it may be you're diversifying, put a good explanation onto why this wouldn't happen either as quickly or as effectively if you weren't getting Innovate UK investment from that. To show that it is. And Innovate accept risk. They know that innovation is risky, diversifying is risky, all those elements are there. What is very key is you have to show how you're managing that risk. So one of the requirements is a risk register. That means you really must spend time on a risk register looking at all the technical, commercial, managerial and environmental risks that could be associated to the project and trying to mitigate them as best as possible. Now, these are risky. It is innovation. R&D doesn't always work. So some places you can't mitigate, but they want to see that you're managing a project through a risk register. That's something that the monitoring officers do very frequently these days. So just to re-emphasize, a couple of fundamentals. Is the market big enough? Does it represent value for money compared to the investment required? Will a 10% market share, which is a good example, will give you that return to justify the amount of grant that you're asking for and the effort that you're putting in. So is the market big enough? Is it world leading? Is the idea sufficiently distinct? It may have been done before in other countries that never tried before in the UK or suitable to transfer to China in this example. But is it? Why did it fail? If it has been done in other countries, what have you learned from there? If you can you really not buy it from elsewhere? So is it just something off the shelf that actually you're just trying to recreate? So we're trying to move from innovation, not consultancy. Is it at the right stage of development? Very important for this call, because you're looking at development stages. If projects are too early, they will not have the impact that Innovate are looking for this particular call. So we don't want research projects. There are different funding streams out there that fund feasibility and academic research, and this isn't one of them. So if you have a customer in mind for it, why aren't they a partner in the application? So if you've got a customer in mind, it'd be great to have them involved and helping shape the project to deliver it better and get it quicker to market at the end. And again, a fundamental, why should public money be used? Why haven't you used in your company funds? Why aren't you raising them? There might be very good reasons for this, or a bank loan or VC investment, but explain to those why, that that you've got a strong risk register to manage those risks, so you're not scaring off an investor. So some very last few quick points. Collaboration agreement. It's been stressed a number of times. We can't stress it enough. You will not get the Innovate UK funding if you do not have a collaboration agreement in place. They sound like really easy things until you actually start to sit down with the whites of your eyes around a table and start arguing who owns what IP. And what do you bring to the background, and what do you expect to exploit out of it? It is really important that you do have those discussions early. We hear of projects that have been successfully granted, awarded, can't sign the collaboration agreement, and the money just goes to somebody else. So it is a key part, and you need to spend time with your partners to do that. There is a series called the Lambert Toolkit. There's a series of different documents, particularly about university and business collaborations, which will be perfect for these 2x2 sort of projects, to have a look at those to see what are the best terms. And those have been funded already, so they are legally well written and recognised by Innovate UK to use. Show evidence of your markets, show that you've done pattern searches, show that you've got references, etc., and be clear and precise. Deadline has been mentioned a number of times, and we can't stress it enough. The other thing I would say is, if you wanted the KTN to help, and we can help review your applications, we can look at things and give you advice, there's no point giving us that on the Monday when you're submitting on the Wednesday, because even if we had a chance to read through it, when can you do the feedback? So always work backwards, weeks before the deadline, so that you've got time to get people's reviewing, so that we can help you to put that in. So really, you've got the deadlines are always published at the time. You need to start discussing planning as soon as possible. You can't start a bid earlier than, and many of you may already have those relationships. Some of the questions ask that, the stronger that relationship already. You can't resubmit previous proposals in this call, but obviously you can still use those relationships. So it's really important to do that, so that if you do get any questions, you can get them in early enough. Innovate can get a formal response back to you. You can address those responses and then still submit in on time. The one of the bits that we read a lot of proposals in our roles to do it, and some are brilliant, and they excite you, and they inspire you, and you think this is a great idea, and some are rubbish. They are awful. Do not enter a competition if you don't put the effort into the application. We hear phrases that it's 1 in 10 with Innovate UK to get funding. The reality is that 6 of those 10 would never be funded ever, because they've not filled the form in correctly, they've not put the detail that was requested. You would never get a bank loan on the basis of that, so why would you get public money? So, you've got to put the effort in. And even when you do put the effort in, these are then competitions. You've got to score as well as possible and put as much effort into every question. Don't do the easy questions. I have seen an application that was ready to be submitted, and they missed out an entire question because they thought it was not relevant for them. That means you're already not going to get through the mark. If it asks for an appendix, do an appendix. The hint is, the clues are all in the questions of what to answer. But most importantly is then finding something that inspires and excites you. When you're reading those public descriptions, when you're reading the scopes, they're not scored, but already you're getting the assessors, this is a good idea, I like this. And even if they then find fault, they're always on your side. If you start off badly and they find fault, you will get scored down. It's natural behaviour. It's like an exam. Show you're working out, answer all the questions. There is a general guidance that you can get, a PDF version that KTN have produced. And how we can help, give you some guides on scope, eligibility. We can help you find partners. We can if you build a relationship with a particular group or individual knowledge transfer manager, they can tell you of different future calls that might be more appropriate with your idea. We might talk to somebody else and think we can do an introduction to you, and we can say we can review your draft proposals given ample time. We have limited resources, so it is a first come, first served, but also we will focus on people that are new to the schemes rather than those that have got a lot of experience from the past. To do that. But again, time is everything. The earlier we see it, but also don't give us something that is so draft, it has no content, because all we end up doing is telling you to answer questions 6, 7, 8, and 9. That's not really useful feedback. So use us when you're getting close to your final draft, if not your final draft, so that the advice we can do can help you. There is lots of other different funding, and at the moment there's lots of different funding calls, lots of transforming food, but there are also other calls. We do an Agri-Food Roundup. That link will take you to that, that will show you all the funding that's appropriate for Agri-Food, and if you sign up to the KTN newsletter, it will signpost you to those various things and elements of that. So that's a lot of information. These slides will be shared, so all those links are active, and obviously there's a number of us from the KTN that are around all day, so we can answer any specific questions around like that. So that's the end of the formal presentations. Thank you. So just before we will go, we're going to do a little short, speed dating before we let you out for lunch. But obviously that's quite difficult to do with the people on the webcast. So they would love to be here, but they can't. So at this point, we'll just formally say thank you for all the contributions from the webcast. I don't think we've got any outstanding questions. No. Brilliant. So thank you all for joining the webcast. And just to point out that all of this has been recorded. So if anyone came in and missed any sessions, the links will come out in a few days, next week, that will link you to all the webcast availability. So thank you to all the people at the webcast. So for the people in the room,